A coward, they'd called him. Said Colt Brennan was yellow through and through. But no one said that now, not with Magnus Whitmore lying bloodied on the saloon floor, his split lip painting the sawdust red, his breath rattling in his chest. Like a broken engine, the Dollar Saloon had gone quiet. The raucous laughter and clinking glasses choked off like a flame snuffed under a boot. Colt stood there, fists trembling, chest heaving, the veins in his neck taut as bowstrings. His knuckles were scraped raw, still curled tight like they hadn't realized the fight was over. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just beginning. Every eye in the room locked on him. Nobody moved. Not the card players frozen mid-hand, not the barkeep clutching his whiskey bottle like a shield. Just the ragged sound of Magnus Whitmore struggling to breathe and the steady drip of his blood seeping into floorboards. Already saturated with decades of violence and regret, Colt didn't feel proud. He felt hunted, like he'd just shot the sheriff in broad daylight and knew the posse was already saddling up. Because Magnus Whitmore wasn't just any rancher. He owned half the county, controlled the water rights, and could summon 50 hard-eyed cowboys with a single whistle. And right now, the king of that crooked empire was on his back, wheezing through cracked ribs and a split mouth, his silver hair smeared with blood and whiskey. All because of $23 damn dollars. Magnus claimed Colt owed him for feed, but Colt had paid him in cash, straight into the old man's hand 2 weeks back. He remembered the feel of those bills, the smirk on Magnus' face when he took them. But when Colt reminded him, Magnus had just gripped his wrist in front of the whole saloon and called him a liar, a thief. Something in Colt had snapped then, clean and violent. Now the aftermath lay between them, gasping on the floor. Magnus dragged himself upright, bracing on a chair, his bloodshot eyes burning with something far worse than pain rage sharpened by humiliation. "You just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life, boy," he rasped, spitting a thick glob of blood onto the floor. "My son Thorne's riding back from Millfield today. When he sees what you done to me," Colt's gut turned to stone. Thorne Whitmore. The name alone could shut down a poker game and make even drunks sit up straighter. A man who'd once strung 3 rustlers from the same tree just to make a point. A man who rode with an army, didn't bluff, didn't back down, and didn't miss when he fired. Magnus dabbed at his mouth with a silk handkerchief, hands shaking, voice low and cold. "He'll be here within the hour, boy." And when he sees his father's blood on your hands, he laughed. The sound wet and cruel. Ain't enough miles in the territory to outrun what's coming. The saloon door slammed open behind them. A breathless boy, red-faced from sprinting, stumbled inside. "Mr. Whitmore," he panted. "Your son's coming. Saw the dust cloud myself. Near 50 riders with him. And they're moving fast." Colt felt the blood drain from his face. 50 men, an army riding in for a single punch, for $23, for pride. Magnus smiled through his ruin of a mouth, grinning like a vulture. What he didn't know was Colt Brennan had spent the last 3 years trying to bury a past that made Thorne look like a schoolmarm, and now it was clawing its way back out. He backed toward the saloon's rear exit, boots dragging against wood. Mind racing, he could already hear the hoof beats, faint but growing like an oncoming storm. Every step he took felt like another second wasted, another breath closer to death. Magnus laughed behind him. "Look at him run," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. The great Colt Brennan, tucking tail like the yellow dog he is. Colt's hand slid toward his Colt point for 5. The weight of it comforted him, familiar, deadly, in Redemption Creek. That gun had spoken for him when no one else would. 5 men down in 10 seconds. Not because he wanted to, because he had to, because the past never forgets a name, and it never forgives a sin. "I ain't running from your boy, Magnus," Colt said, turning to face him. "But I ain't looking for war neither." The words rang hollow even to his own ears. Magnus spat blood and grinned. "War? This ain't gonna be a war, Brennan. This is gonna be an execution." He nodded toward the window. "My Thorne don't negotiate. He don't forgive. He solves problems." Colt's mind darted to the alley behind the saloon where his horse Shadow waited. Black as midnight and fast as hell. But 50 rifles against 1 stallion, that wasn't an escape. That was suicide on four legs. The boy still stood at the doorway, watching like a wide-eyed witness to a coming apocalypse. They say Thorne's got long-range rifles. Mr. Brennan, he whispered, knows these hills like his own skin. Colt nodded. This wasn't a fight. It was a hunt. Thorne wasn't riding into town to teach a lesson. He was coming to finish a story his father had started years ago. Through the saloon's dusty windows, shapes began to take form in the haze. Riders in formation, not a wild bunch of ranch hands, but soldiers on horseback. These men were trained, disciplined, dangerous. Magnus pushed himself upright, straightened his bloodied vest like a man preparing for a sermon. You know the funny thing, Brennan, he said, voice thick with venom, if you just apologized, swallowed your pride, we'd be playing cards by now. His smile stretched bloody and cruel. But no, you had to play hero. Colt clenched his jaw. He had the receipt, or what was left of it. Magnus had torn it to shreds when Colt tried to show it, knowing damn well that in a town where he owned the bank, the sheriff, and the mayor, Colt's truth didn't matter. Hoofbeats thundered, now rumbling like Judgment Day. Colt had maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. But then Magnus said something that froze him in place. Oh, and Brennan, he called, voice oily with delight. My boy knows all about Redemption Creek. The words hit like a slug to the chest. Colt's hand stilled on the door handle. His breath vanished. He knows exactly who you really are. Magnus smiled wider, blood on his teeth. You thought that beard and a new name would hide you? Thorne's been hunting men like you for years. He knows all about the Hartwell gang, about Sheriff Coleman, about the deputies you gunned down. Colt's throat tightened. Hartwell gang. That name belonged to Ghost's men who haunted his sleep and clung to his spine like a curse. He'd ridden with killers, done things that made even his gun hand tremble. Some nights, I ain't that man anymore, Colt said, but even he couldn't believe it. Magnus sneered. Tell that to Coleman's widow, to his 3 kids. Thorne don't believe in redemption. He believes in justice. From the window, Colt could see riders cresting the hill now. They weren't coming to talk. Old Pete, sitting near the piano, caught Colt's eye and gave a solemn nod toward the canyon. They got you surrounded, son, he murmured. North Trail's blocked too. Colt's stomach dropped. This wasn't a vendetta. This was an extermination. Then the front doors of the saloon exploded inward. Thorne Whitmore entered like death on horseback, his long coat trailing behind him, silver eyes burning cold. Taller than Colt expected, lean like a whip, and deadly. Still, a rifle rode across his saddle. 50 men poured in behind him like floodwaters, blocking every door, every window, every hope. Thorne's eyes went to Magnus, first bloody, beaten, shirt torn, and something flickered in that expressionless face. Then he looked at Colt. Pa, Thorne said, voice a quiet blade. Who did this? That dog, Magnus rasped, pointing with a shaking hand. Hit me in front of everyone, over $23. Colt stood tall, silent, ready. His fingers hovered near the Colt on his hip, outnumbered 50-1. He didn't flinch. Thorne's gaze sharpened. You're Colt Brennan, rode with Hartwell, killed 5 lawmen in Redemption Creek. It wasn't a question. I'm not that man anymore, Colt said again, softer this time. Thorne nodded. No, that man was smarter. He didn't lay hands on my father. He gestured, and 20 rifles rose in unison, barrels pointed at Colt's heart. But Colt surprised them all. He raised his hands. I paid that debt, he said loud and clear. 2 weeks ago, your father tore up the receipt and called me a thief. Thorne didn't move, but something shifted in his stare. You calling my pa a liar? I'm calling him a man who made a mistake, Colt said. One he made worse by laying hands on me first. Magnus flushed, furious. You lying piece of... Shut up, pa, Thorne snapped. The room held its breath. Show me the receipt, Thorne ordered. Slowly, Colt reached into his vest. 20 rifles followed every twitch of his fingers. He pulled out the torn fragments, shredded, but bearing a bank stamp and his signature. And that's when Magnus lunged. He's going for his gun. The warning tore through the silence like a whip crack, and instantly, 20 rifles turned as one, hammers cocking back with a sound that filled the room with lethal tension. But before fingers could twitch or steel could speak, Thorne Whitmore lifted a single hand. Just one. Hold. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Nobody moves, nobody breathes. A storm held back by the calm of a single command. Colt froze, breath shallow, hands slowly emerging from his vest. But it wasn't a weapon he held, it was paper. Torn, fluttering pieces of a receipt that trembled in his fingers like leaves in the wind. The saloon was so deathly quiet, the faint rustle of paper sounded like thunder. 20 rifles still tracked him, ready to fire at the slightest twitch. But they didn't. Thorne's hands stayed up, immovable, eyes locked on Colt. "Set them down," he said. Slow. Colt stepped forward with deliberate care, every breath measured. He laid the torn receipt pieces onto the whiskey-stained bar, the wood beneath still wet from spilled drinks and dried blood. Thorne stepped forward. His boots thudded softly on the creaking floor, each step deliberate. He never looked away from Colt, not even once, until he stood directly before the fragments. Then, he began to piece them together. The room held its breath. Nobody moved, not even Magnus, whose sweat-drenched face had turned a pale, sickly white. Thorne's fingers moved deftly, shifting scraps like puzzle pieces, aligning bank stamps, matching signatures, his sharp eyes scanning every detail with the precision of a man trained to read lies in silence. Magnus swallowed hard. A drop of sweat traced his cheek. "Son," he stammered. "Don't let him trick you. That's fake. Some forged." I said, "Shut up, Pa." The room flinched. Thorne didn't raise his voice, but the edge in it sliced deep. Magnus fell silent. Thorne continued his examination. A long beat passed. Then he looked up. His voice was flat, controlled, deadly. "This here's from First National. Date stamped yesterday. Your signature. Acknowledgement of full payment. $23 for feed. As stated." Magnus blinked. That can't be." His voice cracked. "You took his money, Pa," Thorne said, his tone low but unforgiving. "You took it. Then you tried to take it again. And when he called you on it, you laid hands on him." Magnus staggered backward, his face drained of color. His lips fumbled for words. I forgot. After the fall, the doctor said my memory. It ain't what it used to be." Thorne didn't blink. It was good enough to call him a thief in front of half the damn town. That silence again, thick, suffocating. Colt didn't move. He barely breathed. The other saloon-goers stood frozen, watching the Whitmores, the most feared family in the territory, split wide open. Over a debt and a lie. Thorne turned slowly to Colt. His face was unreadable. "You paid your debt. My father wronged you." Colt dared to hope just for a second, but the hope cracked when Thorne continued. "But you still laid hands on A. Whitmore." That final sentence hung in the air like a noose. Colt's stomach sank, even with the truth uncovered, with Magnus caught in his own lie. Family blood still demanded retribution. "So, what now?" Colt asked, voice dry. Thorne didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked back and forth between his broken father and the man who had stood his ground. Then, finally, "You ride out. Right now, you don't stop till you're out of Whitmore territory. And you never come back." Magnus exploded. "What? After what he did to me? After he humiliated our family name?" But Thorne wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring out the window. A new dust cloud was approaching, smaller than the one Thorne had ridden in with, but fast, urgent. "That's Sheriff Daniels." One of Thorne's men called from near the door. "He's got a federal marshal with him." Thorne's face darkened. A marshal meant one thing: trouble that didn't listen to territory lines or family names. Someone had sent word about the standoff, and federal marshals didn't ride this far west unless they were hunting something they meant to. Hang. The doors swung open. A tall figure stepped inside, dust clinging to his coat, badge gleaming like a blade in the lamplight. Marshal Wade Kellerman. The room shifted. Fear rippled through it like heat off a forge. This was the man who brought down the Dalton gang, who tracked Black Bart through 3 territories, who never missed his man. And his eyes locked on Colt Brennan like a bloodhound scenting prey. Well, Kellerman drawled. "Colt Brennan, or should I say, Cole Hartwell." Colt's pulse went ice cold. Cole Hartwell, the name he'd buried deep, the name soaked in blood and betrayal, the name the law still wanted hanged. Sheriff Daniels, clearly caught between rocks harder than he liked, stepped forward nervously. Marshal Kellerman's got a federal warrant, multiple charges, including murder, robbery. He paused, then forced it out. And the killing of federal agents. Gasps echoed across the room. Even Thorne's men shifted uneasily. Killing agents didn't just get you hunted, it got you erased. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Federal agents, how many? Kellerman stepped closer. 3. 3 good men with wives and children, cut down by this bastard and his gang. Magnus looked smug again. Told you he was filth, beat me like a dog. Turns out he's a killer too. But Colt didn't shrink. He didn't beg. Instead, something old and dangerous lit behind his eyes. You want to tell them the whole story, Kellerman? He asked, voice low. Or just the parts that don't put you in the noose? The marshal stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. The gold shipment, Colt said, louder now. The one those 3 agents were guarding. The one that never made it. The only person who knew the route was you. You're full of it. Am I? Colt stepped forward. Tell them how you arranged the ambush, promised us safe passage in exchange for a cut, then shot your own men when they figured it out. Kellerman's hand dropped toward his gun. Colt didn't flinch. Tell them how you killed Agent Morrison, your own partner, when he threatened to expose you. I should kill you where you stand. Kellerman growled. You tried, Colt said, but Morrison left something behind. He reached into his vest and pulled out a worn leather journal. Funny thing about corrupt men, he said. They like to keep records. Insurance, I guess. Kellerman went pale. Where did you off Morrison's body? Colt said coldly. Right before I buried him. Thorne's hand reached out. Let me see that. But Kellerman moved first. His gun cleared leather in a blur. Nitrogen monoxide 1 reads that. He shouted, Brennan dies, and that journal burns with him. 20 rifles turned instantly on the marshal, but his weapon was already locked on Colt's chest. Back off, Whitmore. This is federal business. You're outnumbered 50-1, Thorne said. Voice like ice. I don't care, Kellerman snarled. That book gets out. I'm a dead man either way. And then Colt moved. He hurled the journal to Thorne and dove sideways, his own Colt. 45 out and blazing before the first shout echoed. Gunfire tore through the room, smoke choking the air, wood splintering as bullets ripped through beams and glass. In less than 3 seconds, it was over. Marshal Wade Kellerman lay twisted on the floor, eyes glassy, his gun still smoking in his dead hand. A hole in his chest steamed faintly in the cooling air. Colt stood over him, pistol raised, smoke curling from the barrel like a spirit rising from the grave. Thorne picked up the journal. Pages flipped under his fingers, scribbled notes, maps, meeting times, blood money, son of a bitch, Thorne muttered. He looked at Colt with something close to respect. You weren't the killer. You were the one trying to stop it. Colt nodded, his hand shaking slightly as he holstered his weapon. Morrison was my friend. We fought together. When he found out what Kellerman planned, he came to me, asked me to help him stop it. Sheriff Daniels slowly rose from behind an overturned table. But the report said, I killed the Hartwell gang, Colt said. All of them. After they killed Morrison and the agents, they thought I was in on it. I wasn't. His voice broke, just slightly. Thorne read on. This documents everything. Dates, maps, even sketches of ambush sites. He looked up. Why didn't you bring this to the law? To who? Colt laughed bitterly. Kellerman was the law, head of the task force. He controlled the story every time I tried. The trail led back to him. He's been hunting me ever since. Behind them, Magnus coughed. Small and weak. So, you really did pay that debt. Thorne turned slowly. That's what you care about. The old man swallowed, looking lost now. I didn't remember. Doctor said the fall. I didn't mean to start all this. Colt stared at him, long and quiet. The rage had drained from him. All that remained was weariness. We all make mistakes, Magnus, he said finally. But yours nearly killed us all. And with that, he turned and walked out into the morning light, past Thorne, past the rifles, past the bloodstains, and into whatever came next. The difference, Thorne said quietly, closing the journal with a sharp snap, is whether we own up to our mistakes. He turned to Sheriff Daniels, his tone brooking no debate. "You're going to send a telegram to the federal marshal's office. Tell them Kellerman is dead, and tell them exactly why. This journal," he held it up, stained, dog-eared, a holy relic of truth, "is going to clear Brennan's name and expose the real bastard behind Redemption Creek." Daniels nodded fast, the relief pouring off him like sweat off a horse. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." But Colt knew this wasn't the end. The heat of danger might have passed. The gun smoke might have cleared, but the shadow of the Whitmore name still hung heavy in the room. He looked at Thorne, steady and unflinching. "Even if I'm cleared," he said, voice low, "I still laid hands on your father. In front of half the town. Round here, that don't just blow away in the wind." Thorne studied him. Quiet, serious, then nodded slowly. "You're right. It does mean something." The pause that followed was heavy, thick with expectation. Every man in that room was waiting to see which way Thorne would lean, blood or truth, legacy or justice. But sometimes, Thorne said, voice firm, a man has to choose between what's expected and what's right. He turned and walked to his father, who still sat hunched in the corner, looking older than his years, diminished by the weight of shame and confusion. Thorne reached down, helping the old man to his feet. "Pa," he said softly, "you owe this man an apology, a public one." All eyes turned. Magnus looked around the saloon, meeting the gazes of the same men who had once feared him, respected him, envied him. And now they waited to see if he'd humble himself. He looked at Colt, no longer the man he'd accused, but the man who had spared him. I'm sorry," he said, voice thin and brittle. "I'm sorry for the confusion, the accusation. All of it. You did nothing wrong." Colt nodded once, no gloating, no smirk, just a quiet acceptance that spoke of deeper scars. "We're square, Magnus. No hard feelings." Thorne straightened, turning to face the crowd. His voice carried like a rifle shot. "Anyone here got a problem with how this was handled?" Silence. The kind that doesn't demand respect but earns it. Men shifted in their boots, glanced away, and said nothing, because what could be said after watching a son choose justice over his own blood? The tension finally began to melt. The guns were down, the danger past. But Colt knew that his journey wasn't over. 3 years, 3 long years of hiding behind another man's name, of living like a fugitive, of keeping his head low and his truth buried. That part of his life had just ended, and now he had to ask the question that had haunted him every night since Redemption Creek. Who was Cole Hartwell now? 3 hours later, the Dollar Saloon had returned to something that resembled normal, if anything could be normal again. The body of Marshal Kellerman had been removed, and Thorne's men had gone back to their posts. The bullet holes in the walls would be patched. The blood would be scrubbed from the floor. But the weight of what had happened still clung to the air like the lingering scent of gunpowder. Colt sat at the bar, nursing the same whiskey Thorne had insisted on buying. Between them lay the open Journal Agent Morrison's final testimony. Its pages were rough, stained, but full of steady, meticulous handwriting, notes, sketches, records, and truth. Morrison was a good man, Colt said, running a weathered finger along the paper's edge. Died believing justice still meant something. Took me 3 years to finish what he started. Thorne refilled both their glasses, watching the amber liquid swirl. "Sometimes justice takes its time," he murmured, "but it always finds its way home." He nodded toward the bar where Sheriff Daniels had sent off the telegram. "By tomorrow morning, every law office in the territory will know the truth. Your name's cleared." In the corner, Magnus sat with his shoulders slumped. He looked, every day of his 65 years now, stripped of the fire and fury that had once made men step aside in the street. Dr. Hayes had examined him and quietly confirmed what most already suspected. The fall from his horse 6 months ago had done more damage than anyone had realized. Not just broken ribs, something in the head. Memory loss, delusion, confusion. The start of a slow unraveling. Was gonna need looking after. Thorne said, following Colt's gaze, "The ranch, the business, everything. I should have seen it sooner." Colt shook his head. "You can't stop a man from growing old, Thorne. You can only be there when the time comes." His voice faltered, just slightly. Same way Morrison was there for me. Same way I should have been there for him. He closed the journal gently, reverently, as if folding shut a Bible. He trusted me, believed I'd do the right thing with what he left behind. Took me 3 years, but I got there. Through the saloon's dusty windows, life outside had picked up its rhythm again. Kids were back in the streets, throwing stones and chasing dogs. Shopkeepers swept off their porches. The blacksmith's hammer rang like a heartbeat. Peace had returned, but it had come at a cost. So what now? Thorne asked. You're a free man. No more running, no more hiding. What does Cole Hartwell do with a second chance? Colt stared into his drink, the glass cradled in both hands like it might hold the answers he'd been searching for. Since the blood first spilled in Redemption Creek, I've been Colt Brennan so long, he said. Finally, I'm not sure I remember who Cole Hartwell was. That man died back there, with Morrison, with the others. Thorne nodded slowly. Maybe. But maybe the best parts of him didn't. The part that Morrison believed in. The part that carried this truth across 3 years of silence. That man's still in there. Just then, the saloon doors creaked open. Sheriff Daniels came in, telegram in hand. His face flushed with adrenaline and good news. He made a beeline to their table, holding the slip out like a victory banner. It's official, he said breathlessly. Federal Marshal's office has dropped all charges against Cole Hartwell. They're launching a full investigation into Kellerman's actions, and they're posthumously honoring Agent Morrison for his service. The weight that had clung to Colt's back for years, heavy as iron, sharp as regret, finally lifted. He sat up straighter, like a man freed from invisible chains. Morrison wouldn't just be remembered as a casualty of a gang gone rogue. He'd be remembered for what he truly was, a man of honor, a friend, a hero. Thorne raised his glass to Morrison and to second chances. They drank in silence, a salute to the dead, a prayer for the living. Outside, the sun dipped behind the mountains, bleeding gold and crimson across the western sky. It was the kind of sunset that whispered of beginnings, of chances reclaimed. Colt stared into it, quiet, still. Then he said, I think I'll ride north. Colorado territory. They're hiring lawmen up there. Men who know how to track real criminals. Thorne's mouth twitched into a smile. From outlaw to lawman. Morrison would have liked that. Colt stood, leaving coin on the bar for the drinks. Maybe he would have laughed, but I think he would have understood. Sometimes, a man has to become the thing the world needs him to be. As he turned toward the door, a voice called after him. Son, Magnus said, standing unsteadily, but proud. Thank you for not killing my boy when you could have, for showing him that sometimes mercy matters more than pride. Colt looked back, nodded once, then to Thorne. Take care of your father, and remember, truth don't stay buried. It always finds its way home, even if it takes 3 years to get there. He stepped into the cool night air where his horse, Shadow, waited at the post like he'd always belonged there. Colt, no. Cole Hartwell swung up into the saddle with a calm that came from finally putting ghosts to rest. He wasn't running anymore. He was riding toward something. The man who'd once been branded a coward, a thief, a killer was gone. In his place rode someone forged by fire, tempered by truth, and driven by the promise he'd made to a fallen friend. A man no longer hiding behind a name, but living by it. And tomorrow, he would ride north toward a new chapter, with Morrison's journal tucked close to his heart, a compass of truth reminding him that some things, some people are worth standing for, no matter how long the road or how high the price. And if you felt the weight of this tale, consider sending a super chat to help us keep telling stories like this, stories of redemption, justice, and the strength it takes to rise when the world wants you to fall. Now click on the next video, because the next story will shake everything you thought you knew about loyalty, justice, and the courage it takes to change your fate.